let's have a look at the Saxons. The Saxons have the standard Nordic generals, the Nordic warlord, decent enough sword infantry in shield wall, he's scarce, he's tanky. Then we have the Nordic raid leader, wielding the fearsome Dane axe. Even though he has a very low melee attack, he can get a lot of kills against enemy infantry. He doesn't like getting charged much, but he doesn't like missiles, but he is a good offensive unit. Then we have a chieftain with the Gedrift, and this guy, I mean, the melee stats are not bad, the charge bonus is okay, the melee defense is good, the armor is great. But then we get to 175 health and 108 morale. And I have seen this man stand and fight. He's the only guy remaining with his bodyguard in the army. The army is losing, he's attacked in the rear, he's under flaming shot. He just doesn't care. 108 morale means that in most cases you're going to have to kill this guy dead. So the Gedrith were... it basically just means a body of men, a group of men, a troop. These were the chosen men of the Saxon warlord or Saxon king or whatever you want to call him. So you get a very expensive infantry unit, but you also get a general that is very, very hard to kill. For spears we have the Nordic levy, nothing special about them, just your standard spear unit. Then we have the Saxon spears, and poor armor, very poor health. They do have the resistance to fatigue, so they are fairly fast and fairly good at running around. Expert charge and spear wall. The Nordic spears, slightly better than the Nordic levy, but not by much. Then we have the elite Nordic spears, a significant upgrade from the Nordic spears. They also have Frenzy, which is kind of a useless ability. It can be nice to use it when the unit is already exhausted. Don't do what the Creative Assembly suggested in their video about the longboards. They suggested activating Frenzy at the start of a battle, you know, just to make sure your men get exhausted faster. And then we have the Duguth Spearman, and this elite Duguth Spearman. And... Oduge in Norwegian means to be good at something, to be worth something. And you'll notice a lot of similarities between these languages that derive from have influences from both Old Germanic, Proto-Germanic, Proto-Norse, Old Norse. They are very similar, vary a bit in pronunciation and in the way that they are spelled, but basically the same. And these men were men of proven worth, men of a certain age, mainly used as supporting troops, not frontline troops. That would be that duty would be delegated to the younger men. Nordic Spearmasters, the exact same unit as the other Nordic Spearmasters. Good spear unit, but a bit on the expensive side. The Duguth Spearmen are a bit cheaper. Very good armor, very good health. The Nordic spears are better in just about every single way, but the Duguth spears have steady, which is the main difference here. Also no encourage on them. Encourage isn't huge. Pikes, standard Nordic pikemen, nothing much to say about them. Standard Nordic band, very useful for blocking charges and as a sponge unit. Also have precursors. You get 2 precursors with a Nordic brigade. Still a horrible unit. I much prefer having 2 Nordic bands instead of a Nordic brigade. Then we have the Hearthguard, and these are basically the same unit as the Hirdmen of the other Nordic factions. However, they lack the scare trait and they are not immune to fear, so that's why they are a bit cheaper, I assume. Nordic Warriors, again, the exact same unit as with the other Nordic factions. I've talked about those, so I'm not going to mention much about them again. Elite Nordics, again, same thing. Chosen Warriors, exact same thing. These guys are not worth it. Then we have the Gesithas, the Companions, the followers or journeymen, followers of a chieftain, warlord, or king. They are, or a thane. They have decent melee stats, not a great charge. Again, a super tanky unit, but in shield wall they can hold basically forever against infantry. But they are, in my opinion, they are much too expensive to bring compared to bringing Hearthguard. Hearthguard also has great health. It's also a very tanky unit, so I would much prefer to have 2 Hearthguards than to have 1 Gesitas. You know them, you love them, the Nordic Axe Warriors. Throw javelins on the charge, devastating charge, but they just die. If you look at these guys, they die, unless they manage to plant their axe in your head first. Nordic Axe Warband, completely useless unit, unless axes get significantly cheaper. It's not going to be worth much bringing these guys. The Nordic bows are not a good bow unit. They have low missile damage, they have low range, they have a low amount of ammunition, but they are super cheap. So they can be very nice for pouring flaming shots onto enemy cavalry, or whistling shot and flaming shot, that combination, to try and break engagements. Nordic hurlers, just don't bother. I mean, 9 ammunition. Don't bring these guys. They are horrible. If you're going to bring them, you can bring them in conjunction with something like 2 Nordic bows. That's going to allow you to pour the standard shot here. Is going to reduce charge speed and speed of the enemy. So if you stack flaming, -9, -9 morale, and whistling, so that's -12, so we are at -21. Then we're going to have -8 melee attack, and also -25 speed and charge speed, which is significant. Can be nice for stopping dangerous enemy units. Nordic skirmishers, very decent skirmish unit for the price, but they really can't take any fire. They have a low amount of health. They can kill cavalry very quickly because they have bonus against them and already very high missile damage. The same goes for the Nordic Brigands. This is mostly a single player specific unit. You won't be able to hide very many units, or they can ignore terrain. They are very fast, but they're also very expensive. Now the Geoguth Javelin Men basically means young men. They are, again, a super fragile unit. They have more. The Nordic Brigands, only 4 ammo, 60 missile damage. Just don't bother. The Geoguth Javelin Men, more ammo, still die very easily. A slight upgrade will be the Nordic Javelins. They have more health, a bit more armor, but the main difference between these 2 units is the morale is much better for the Geoguth for some reason, and the speed is also better, so they are pretty fast units. Then we have a very special unit in the elite Saxon Javelins. They have 12 ammo. 12 ammo, and they basically have melee infantry stats. 22 melee attack, 40 weapon damage, 60 armor, 114 health, 54 morale. This is a very interesting unit. However, if it was priced in the 600s, I might consider it. But considering its price is a massive 800, it's going to be, if it destroys enemy cavalry, if you're able to make them do that, then sure. I mean, they are very heavy skirmishers. That's going to pay dividends if you're able to make them fire at enemy cavalry. So I haven't experimented too much with these javelin units. There are, for the price of 1 elite Saxon javelin, you're going to get 2 Nordic bows and a melee unit. And I would much rather have that than the elite Saxon javelins, but they can be made to work. In terms of cavalry, the Saxons have a slightly better roster than the Viking forefathers. Nordic mounted raiders, don't bother. They die way too easily. The same with the Nordic horse raiders, really. Don't bother. Not enough armor, not enough health. They have a good attack against cavalry, but they also die very, very easily due to being light. The Saxon mounted warband has a bit more armor, a bit more health. It's a decent unit, but it's also, compared to Germanic horse, it underperforms massively, and it costs the same as Germanic horse. It has the precursor javelins, so that's something at least, but Saxon mounted warband dies very easily. Nordic horse lords, they are a good tanky unit, not quite as good as upgraded Germanic horsemen, but still a good unit and the best unit you can bring. The heroic cavalry, if you look at the stats, compare the stats of the heroic cavalry to the Nordic horse lords, upgraded Nordic Horse Lords are going to do better than the heroic cavalry. And the cool thing about a Nordic Horse Lord scare, heroic cavalry doesn't. Now the cool thing about Nordic Horse Lords is that you can use the headhunt to make them unbreakable. So when a unit would be start wavering, you can make cavalry engagements last even longer, tie down enemy units by giving them headhunt, which allows you to pull in reinforcements, which can be very, very useful. Now, I much prefer the Nordic Horse Lords over the heroic cavalry. The heroic cavalry is too expensive for my tastes. Sure, you get a better charge bonus, you get better melee defense, you also get slightly less armor, you get much better morale though. So, but 100 more, I'm not sure they are worth it. It's still nice that the Saxons can bring 2 heavy melee cavalry units. And then they have the Lancers, and none of the forefathers have Lancers, and for the price, these units have a lot of health, they have a good charge bonus, they are a very decent shock cavalry unit. Ideally, you want to charge them into infantry, because once you engage them against melee cavalry, they're not going to be able to pull out without taking massive casualties, and they don't do well in extended melee. 22 melee attack, 10 melee damage, not going to do much. Skirmish cavalry, 100% useless and way too expensive. The Warhounds are an interesting unit. The Warhounds themselves can't kill much, but they can be used to disrupt an enemy that doesn't know how to deal with Warhounds. But unfortunately, it's very easy to deal with these Warhounds. So let's go to Alabu and have a look at these Saxon units. Hopefully I don't get shot to pieces by the AI's artillery. I don't think I will, since the AI is designated defender here. Alrighty, so for the Saxons we have, first of all, the stealth units, the Nordic Brigands, do not bother. Nordic Raiders, do not bother. On the flanks here we have the Nordic Javelins. Then we have Nordic Skirmishers. More Nordic Skirmishers. Behind those we have the Nordic Brigade. Nordic Warriors. Oh, those shields are like a stab to the eye. This is slightly better on the Nordic Axe Warband. Too bad it's such a crappy unit. Nordic Spears, again with the horrible shields. Nordic Levy, better shields on these guys. Chosen Warriors, now we're talking. These guys look badass. Gazetha's, very cool looking unit. Then we have the Elite Nordic Warriors, cool looking unit, sadly very expensive. Nordic Spearmasters, another awesome looking unit. Too bad that these Duggoth Spearmen have the stupid looking shields that they have, because if not they would be, and you can see they are kind of old. They have grey hair, grey beards. Elite Nordic Spears, this is a cool unit. The Chieftain with Gedrith, looking at them you wouldn't guess they would be as tanky as they are. They are extremely tanky. I'm sure you recognize this helmet, a very, very iconic helmet, a very cool looking helmet. Here we have the little dogs, not quite up to the level of the Lani dogs, close to useless, but they can be fun. Here we have the Elite Saxon Javelins, and these guys are a dual purpose unit. They can do well in melee, but very, very expensive units. And let's see, the Goguth Javelins, the Nordic Band, Saxon Spears, Nordic Hurlers. I quite like the color scheme on the Saxon units, to be honest. Very, very earthy and looks proper. Nordic Horse Raiders, do not bother. Saxon Lancers, yeah, these guys are pretty nice. Here we have the Nordic Horse Lords, a decent unit. The Heroic Cavalry, decent unit, but a bit on the pricey side for my tastes. Nordic Mounted Raiders, Saxon Mounted Warband. It looks like all of these guys have the infamous helmet. And the Nordic Pikes, again with the stupid looking shields. So, I'm going to concede defeat. I could not deal with the AI. And we can look at some Saxon builds. Now, Saxon builds are going to be very similar to the forefather builds, but there are a few important differences between the Saxon builds and the Nordic builds. If you want just a cheap tanky general, you can bring the Nordic Warlord. In terms of spear support, I am starting to move a bit away from spear support, and the reason for that is that spears are unreliable counters against cavalry. They get killed too easily by cavalry to be of much worth. So what I actually prefer is having super cheap infantry to throw precursor javelins and then close off cavalry engagement, so cavalry cannot disengage without taking massive casualties. Now, 6 cavalry units would be the bare minimum, in my opinion. They will be your main killing power. This is true for most factions. You can have some lancers as well. It's a very nice unit to have. Now, I'm not going to show the most competitive builds here, because that's probably going to be boring. It's going to be basically the same builds for all factions. Now, you might want some skirmishers in here. You might want to take out a few Nordic bands and have a stronger melee line. The Hearthguard are very cost effective, especially in shield wall. They can defeat infantry that is much more expensive than they are. So for the remaining funds here, you can either, for example, you can either go for some skirmishers, you can go for some better infantry. If you really want to, you can try elite Saxon javelins. I wouldn't personally recommend that. Always nice to have some bow support, and upgrades are going to be well spent on melee cavalry, never shock cavalry, or rarely melee infantry, never skirmishers. So you can have some upgrades here. Now, if you want to go for a bit more of a role-playing Saxon army, you can bring the chieftain with the Gedrith, some elite Duggoth spears. So now we're going to go for the Saxon units, the unique Saxon units. 2 Gesethas as your elite infantry, a few Hearthguard in support. Then you can bring some... I would still bring quite a few Nordic Horse Lords, but if you want to go lighter on the cavalry just for role-playing purposes, I guess, that would be the only reason to do so, or because you think it's more fun to play with balanced builds, which I could agree to. You can bring some skirmishers in the form of a few Nordic bows. I don't really like pikes for the Nordic factions. Sure, you can bring them, they can be nice to protect your center. If you protect your center with pikes, you can force the engagements to start happening out on the flanks, so you can gain advantages by splitting up the enemy army, for example. But here you have a strong enough infantry core to deal with most infantry. You have some nice support for your cavalry. Bring a few cheap Saxon lancers to support the infantry in killing off enemy infantry, because while these infantry units are tanky, they won't kill very quickly. So the Duggoth go on the flanks. In the center, you're going to have a few Nordic band to stop the charges from these units. Pull in cavalry so Nordic bows can fire flaming shots, and when these guys get off a precursor volley and the Nordic bows start raining fire on cavalry, your Nordic Horse Lords can do very well against them. And also, having the ability to use flaming and whistling together with the fair effect from these units, it's going to do a decent job of breaking enemy units. So this would be a slightly more balanced Saxon build. If you want to go full Saxon, you can bring some Saxon spears instead of the Duguth, but I don't really think it's worth it. I much prefer having a sturdy spear unit, if indeed I'm going to bring a spear unit at all. So again, not the strongest, most competitive builds, but just a nice collection of units that allows you to deal with several different scenarios. So let's just say that I was to go full retard and show you a build that would be difficult for many factions to deal with. You're going to go cheap on the general, you're going to go cheap on the infantry, you're going to be spamming Nordic horse lords, you're going to be giving them triple gold. Then you can have, depending on how many cavalry units you can have, you're going to be bringing some heroic cavalry as well in this setup. 2 heroic cavalry. There we are. And basically spend the rest of the funds upgrading the shit out of your units. Now the Saxons are at a disadvantage here, because the Saxons cannot bring as much good melee cavalry as other, especially some Germanic factions can bring a lot of cost-effective melee cavalry, and you don't have a cavalry general, which is a problem for the Saxons. But I would, for the Saxons, I would probably go for something like this, possibly something like this, which would give me funds to upgrade further, and it will also give me the funds to have more meat shield support for my cavalry units to close off cavalry engagements. So this build is a very boring build, but in my opinion it's some of the most easiest to use and most effective that the Saxons can do. So the Saxons, definitely not a power faction, but if you like infantry, the Saxons can deliver a lot of very, very tanky infantry with some nice cavalry support. Strength and honor.